Dr. García, Chair of the World Languages and Literatures Department, and I'm here to welcome you to this year's conference, our second celebration of the life and works of Colombian author Gabriel García Marquez. Last year on this date, we paid homage to him at the year anniversary of his death. This year, we gather again to explore this great author's work, in particular his short stories, from a variety of disciplinary lenses. I want to thank you for attending this morning and for all of those of you who have worked so hard to make this event possible. This conference is sponsored by the generous funding of the SCSU Faculty Development Office, the Department of World Languages and Literatures, and the Office of the Dean of Arts and Sciences. Along with the funding, the event could not have been possible without the many hours our presenters and organizers have invested in making it possible. Thank you all so much. And I want to extend a special thanks to Dr. Pelayo, who has been the main organizer of this event. He's really outdone himself again this year. So with that, I'd like to introduce Stephen Brees, the Dean of the School of Arts and Sciences, and I'd like to thank him for supporting this event with monies from his office and for his willingness to give the welcome and opening remarks. Dean?
At the heart of it all is story and the storyteller. We embark together on a pilgrimage of thought and fancy and sooner whisk away to a unique and intimate place where we allow ourselves the luxury of imagination and empathy. In the most fundamental way, this is how we individually experience literature and really all of the arts. Today, we have great scholars here among us to help us appreciate more deeply and illuminate his genius, and we look forward to these presentations, these conversations all day long. But for this artist, my renewed conversation with Gabriel began a couple of weeks ago, and for that I am grateful, very grateful, for nothing inspires or instructs more profoundly than great art. I welcome you to this exciting SCSU event. We are proud to host this interdisciplinary and transcultural conference for the second year in a row, as Rachel just told you. My most sincere thanks to Dr. Pelayo, Dr. García, the Department of World Languages and Literatures, and to all the Southern faculty and staff who are participating in the conference and who helped make this happen. So thank you, thank you. But as we explore the life and the work of Gabriel García Marquez, I want to say simply that it's in the story and the storyteller where our lives are allowed to be complete. Welcome to each and all.
I'd like to introduce our first panelist, Dr. Maria Diamantis. Dr. Diamantis has been teaching at Southern for a total of 21 years. She spent 15 of these years delivering courses in the English department in the School of in the Education department in the School of Education. Her areas of interest and research are on mathematics education, STEM integration, and women in mathematics. She has served as president of the Associated Teachers of Mathematics in Connecticut, the Association of Teachers of Mathematics in New England, and on numerous committees for the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics. She presents at local, regional, national, and international conferences. Dr. Diamantis enjoys any challenge, either in mathematics problem solving or otherwise, including this most recent challenge of researching Gabriel García Marquez's impact on the Greek community. Welcome.
Thank you. When I was asked by Ruben to speak about Gabriel García's, all of his works actually in the Greek community, I wasn't sure how to take it. This is a challenge, and coming from a mathematician, the challenge is problem solving, creative thinking, thinking outside the box. This spring break, I decided the best thing to do is just go to her house, meet her, sit down and talk to her, so that I can hear from her who was Gabriel García Marquez. What do you know? Translated all of his books, 21 out of 23 to be exact. So Gabos's next book translation started in 1981, and that was the 100 Years of Solitude.
In 1981, too, just to give you an idea, that the Chronicle of a Death Foretold had already published 500,000 copies in Greek. They never counted how many copies were for the 100 Years of Solitude. The publisher didn't want anybody to know the number of copies published and sold. But to give you an idea, if this book had 500,000 copies, imagine how many copies were for the 100 Years of Solitude. 1982, instantaneous triumph. Why do you think that happened in 1982? Exactly. And immediately, Livanis, which is the publishing company, called her and said to her, you have to translate all of his books. So in 1983, the next blue word is her name in Greek, Kleti. She translated 5 of his 10 books at the time. She just couldn't do all of them, but in 1 year, translating 5 books is a huge, tremendous task. And you'll see why as I discuss her feeling about it later on. Had his books for sale. So you can imagine now how many were really sold of the 100 Years of Solitude. And she also said to me that there's no one home in Greece that does not have 1 copy, if not 2. Every citizen has 1 copy of his books. That's how much they respected him. Gabriel, in parentheses Gabo, because from now on we're going to learn the Greek Gabriel Gabo, was an outstanding storyteller, she tells me. Every time they got together, he had something to say. Very humorous, very entertaining, and outstanding in storytelling. But he did not like big crowds. He also shared some of the stories with his mother. His mother did not want him to publish the stories that he had written, and more specifically the one about the Chronicle of the Death Foretold, because it referred to people in the family, relatives, and she didn't want them to read it in public. She didn't want them to know of it. So she asked him to please do not publish until they're gone. So that I thank Ruben for putting me into this challenge, because as a mathematician, I cannot just not answer, solve a problem. I have to solve it, I have to finish it, and therefore his challenge really made me appreciate and be intrigued by this author. So thank you very much. I hope you learned something, and I hope you enjoyed it.
I'd like to introduce our next panelist. Dr. Patricia Olney is Professor of Political Science and co-director of the Latin American Studies minor at Southern Connecticut State University. She has a Bachelor of Arts in Physics and Political Science from the Bryn Mawr College and a master's degree and doctorate in International Relations from the University of Miami. Previously, she was the Latin American Bureau Manager of U.S. News and World Report and a visiting research fellow at the Center for U.S.-Mexican Studies at the University of California in San Diego and at the Universidad de los Andes in Bogotá, Colombia. She is currently working on the final revisions of a manuscript on Mexican politics with the Lynn Reiner Press, which should be out by the end of the year. Congratulations. Patricia?
This paper uses the story Los Funerales de la Mamá Grande to discuss some of the more politically relevant aspects of García Marquez's worldview, although it only really scratches the surface because he has insights about so many relevant issues, including the legacies of Spanish colonialism, U.S. neocolonialism, personalism, caudillismo, caciquismo, the role of the church, the army, dictatorships, capitalism, guerrilla groups, underdevelopment, racism, discrimination, and many other political issues. While the U.S. is conspicuously absent in this story, I will also cover its role in his worldview because of its importance. Los Funerales de la Mamá Grande is a whimsical, lighthearted, satirical microcosm of all the ills the political and social system imposes on ordinary people in provincial Latin America. Unlike many of his stories that are dark and unsettling, this one is told with a humor and charm that are disarming Yet its subtext seems to be a call to arms, a call for revolution. It chronicles the death of the immense 92-year-old María del Rosario Castañeda y Montero, who inherited the power that made her La Mamá Grande at the age of 22 in the magical province of the same Macondo that was catapulted to fame in Cien Años de Soledad. Her funeral takes place 100 years after the death of Melquiades in that novel. She is a symbol of the landowning class that finds its origins in the colonial period and emblematic of the caciquismo or bossism that characterizes much of provincial Latin America. Her size and the limitless authority and prestige she projects are symbolic of the power this landowning class wields over the central government, the church, and every aspect of the life of its residents. Yet this power is largely illusory, as La Mamá Grande's actual wealth is quite small, and her possessions are all in decay, as are the state institutions in the power structure. The story recounts the many preparations for her death, and her last will and testament, details that reveal the degree to which this feudal power structure captured the government and formed part of a network of elites that controlled every aspect of power in the country and beyond, at the expense of the citizen subjects. The story also alludes to various aspects of Latin American and Colombian history, including the corruption of colonial institutions, the post-independence emergence of caudillismo in the form of battles between conservatives and liberals, all connected to the persistence of a web of complicities between traditional, national, and global elites. La Mamá Grande's death reverberates around the world, with the Colombian president, Congress, the army, and even the Pope marking it as a critical event. The Pope goes to great lengths to attend the funeral, braving canoe rides through mosquito-infested jungle rivers. The corrupt Supreme Court crafts the legal rationale for the president to attend, marking the first time the townspeople have even seen his likeness, as he is all but irrelevant in Macondo. Delegations of foreign dignitaries likewise crowd the solemn two-week celebrations. People of humble origins come from far and wide, eager to capitalize on the opportunity to peddle their wares, including religious medallions with La Mamá Grande's image. Her death reveals the contrast between the rot and hollowness of her real power and the art of illusion that makes it seem infinite. The narrator suggests that her death frees the government, the church, and the citizens of the grip of her absolutist rule, creating a window of opportunity, although it is implied that her nephew and loyal enforcer, Nicanor, will soon take her place and the traditional power structure will remain intact. Behind the cloak of harmless humor, the story seems to subtly encourage revolutionary action by revealing why peaceful change is almost impossible. Los Funerales de la Mamá Grande captures the not-so-uniquely Colombian situation of a weak state, captured by the feudal landed elites in ways that almost beg for revolutionary change. While there is no specific call to action, it is clear that a brave revolutionary force could break the hollow power of these paper tigers. It reveals his skepticism at the time about the possibilities for peaceful democratic change, since all the democratic institutions, even public opinion and the rights of man, had fallen into the black hole of the absolutist rule of the caciques. He therefore sympathized with undemocratic forces like Fidel Castro and the FARC, who support a state that is also captured, only this time on behalf of the poor majority. It is an imperfect goal, but as the Mexican political analyst Arnaldo Córdoba once pointed out, perhaps the best possible one within this profoundly pessimistic vision.
I'd like to introduce our last speaker. Jacqueline Tost has been a librarian at Southern for 10 years, and part of her role in the library is to be the liaison to the World Languages Department. She works with World Languages faculty to choose materials for the library collection, and she teaches bibliographic instruction sessions for their undergraduate and graduate classes. Jackie has been working in libraries for 28 years, and she is a member of the American Library Association. She works in Bewley Library's Technical Services Department as a cataloger and the coordinator of the library's digitization project. Welcome, Jackie.
Thanks for inviting me also, Ruben. I'm going to speak today about the librarian's perspective on Gabriel García Marquez. I decided to break my discussion up into two parts. One part is to discuss my reaction to reading Gabo, and the other part is to talk about library topics as they relate to Gabo. As a librarian, some themes that interest me are how knowledge and information are transmitted in society, the pursuit of intellectual freedom, and how societies preserve their cultural heritage. To start, reading Gabo. I should admit that I have only read one Gabriel García Marquez novel, and that is 100 Years of Solitude. As a trivial aside, I thought you would be interested in knowing that over the years that I've worked at Southern, this is one of the most frequently stolen or missing books in the library. That can only account for its popularity. Last year I prepared a display for this conference, and I know the book was in the display, and this year I couldn't find it. So we ordered 2 more copies, and we hope that they'll be there next year for the next conference if there is one. I thoroughly enjoyed the book. It was a little difficult, and yet at the same time easy to keep track of the characters because all the family members ended up having similar names. I liked how the characters were developed, and you saw the consequences of their environments and the parenting that they received as they grew up. Now, from a librarian's perspective, here are some of the things that struck me as I was reading the book. I was interested in how the town of Macondo was isolated and how the citizens were able to learn what was happening in the outside world by the interactions with visitors and the people who temporarily moved in and out of their town. I was fascinated by the characters who were constantly grasping for information, starting with Jose Arcadio Bonillas. Sorry, I'm reading the flowers. Grasping for information for new inventions and breaking down how the inventions worked. They had a bookstore in the town which was kind of like a library, but not really, and it seemed like only a few characters used it. I enjoyed how the encyclopedia, because I'm a librarian, it was not purchased in the bookstore, it was purchased by a traveling salesman. But it kept reappearing in the story. Arielano Segundo buys the encyclopedia, and he buys it for Meme, and then later he uses it for to make up stories because he doesn't speak English. The encyclopedia is in English, and it's raining, and they need something to do. Later, he tells the children that one of the pictures in the encyclopedia is Colonel Arielano Buendia. I can't say it. Sorry. Yeah, I'm supposed to be the world languages liaison. Finally, Arielano looks at the encyclopedia to compare the character chart that Jose Arcadio Segundo used to translate the parchments in the end of the story. So I could identify with the characters in the novel who kept to themselves because I'm somewhat of an introvert. I enjoy staying by myself and reading and working on craft projects. And librarians have a reputation for being introverts, but I can't say that for all of us. Another theme that fascinated me was the theme of censorship in the story, like Patricia spoke about. The banana company workers were killed because they went on strike. The repetition of the facts, and even though they had been censored by the government, made it real and emphasized the horror of it. It showed that even though governments try to cover up things, they really cannot. Someone usually lives to tell the tale, or someone uncovers it later. I'm a librarian, not a critic, but I found this part of the book interesting because some of the biographies of Gabo, like the one by Gerald Martin entitled Gabriel García, A Life, from 2009, talk about the time when he was a journalist in Colombia. He would have been reporting on events, but he was being censored when he turned in his stories. Censorship falls under the second topic that I mentioned in my introduction, intellectual freedom. Librarians believe that people have a right to pursue information without censorship. Intellectual freedom is a major goal of the American Library Association, and it's so important that it's written into our code of ethics. So some of the things that are included in intellectual freedom are privacy, freedom to read materials in the library without the government keeping track of your interests. The American Library Association also keeps abreast of situations when states or individuals try to ban or challenge a book. Although the 100 Years of Solitude isn't the most frequently challenged book, it has sometimes been challenged frequently in public high schools in the United States. And in the recent past, parents or religious groups have objected to it due to sexual situations and because of the way it depicts the Catholic Church or just the Christian Church in general. If you're interested in reading more about the American Library Association, what it says about intellectual freedom, you can look for the Library Bill of Rights on the intellectual freedom page of the American Library Association. So those are the rights that we have. I was very interested to learn that the University of Texas in 2014 acquired the Gabriel García Marquez papers for $2.2 million. The collection was sold by the family and consists of 75 boxes. It made me think of our library in a small way. Although we're not as big as the University of Texas, at Southern we have a few small collections that we've digitized. And so this is the same content manager that we use for the library, and our collections look the same. So you'll see here's a picture, and then there's an introduction, and then over on the right side, there's like a little preview of items. This little screen shows you the newest items that they've added. Then I'm going to go down, and you can read the introduction. And just the last thing I wanted to say that, in Bewley Library we have a lot of material. Hopefully after this conference you'll be inspired to do some more research on Gabriel García Marquez. If you visit the library, we have beautiful study spaces in our new library. And we also have a lot of electronic books about Latin American history and literature, and also print. So you can find me in the basement, and I can help you find things, or you can just go to the reference desk. But thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Jackie. Gosh, I don't want to endorse stealing books from the library, but somehow knowing that our students covet that book enough to continually steal it it's got to be one of the more encouraging things I've heard this year. So with that, I have prepared some questions for our panelists, but I'd like to begin with your questions. So if we find that we need some help stimulating a dialogue, I have some things in my back pocket.
First of all, thank you for the three different perspectives that you presented this evening. I'm very formerly a literature teacher, and I found I'm especially interested in translation and how it differs. And when you spoke to the translator, I noticed that you said she translated exactly. Did she go into further depth of how that worked in the Greek language? Because I've read several articles on how Marquez translates, and it seems that depending on the language, the meaning of the authors differs greatly. Could you go into a little bit more depth on how this reads in Greek and Greek reaction?
Yes, she actually did discuss this a little bit.
She did say that the Greek language is just as rich as the Spanish, and she found that because she spent so much time in Colombia herself and being married to a young man from Colombia at the time and living together and trying to do daily conversations, she was able to make that happen. The thing about her is that she studied the Spanish and she made the connection to the Greek language because she knew the Greek language also. And she found the correct corresponding words that are as descriptive in detail for both the Spanish and then therefore in the Greek language.
I have a couple of questions and comments about translation. And just as a comment, one of Gabriel Garcia Marquez's quotes about translation is one of the most repeated quotes about the matter. He was asked how he liked Gregory Rabassa's translation of 100 Years of Solitude, to which he responded that he liked it much better than the original. And it just, I thought to bring that up because, it really shows, I think, his humor and his generosity of spirit, and also, his willingness to sort of share the power of authorship with his translators, which clearly, he had a very special relationship with his Greek translator. So thank you for that. And if I could ask you a question also about the translation. So later on, we're going to hear from Dr. Fanier, who is the most known translator, or the most known of Gabo's Chinese language translators. And speaking as a translator myself, one of the biggest challenges of translation is translating the many cultural features, not only present in the storyline itself, but also those cultural features that are nuanced in word choice and in language structure. So obviously Chinese is further away from Spanish than Greek or English, both linguistically and culturally. I wondered, Maria, if you had found sort of any of these, in your reading of 100 Years of Solitude in translation, did you notice any kind of moments where there was like a potential for a very difficult translation problem in terms of the culture? If I could use an example, I have a small child, so has everybody seen the Dr. Seuss book, Oh, the Places You'll Go? This whole notion of like going far away it's a very culturally specific kind of a notion, that your success is tied to like how far away you will go. That presents that presents a cultural translation difficulty, because Dr. Seuss is presenting that as a very positive thing. So in your reading, I just wondered, was there a moment when you were thinking to yourself, wow, this is an untranslatable moment, or this doesn't really work in the Greek?
There were parts. I have not finished the English version of it, but the Greek version, as I said, it really touched me and I understood every part of it. I was wondering how that would be in the English. So now that you brought it up, I think I'm going to try to do that connection. There are words, or there is even the environment that he describes and see translated to Greek. And her words brought me to that space, to that moment of time that he is describing. So I don't know how she did that and what the effect would be if I read it in English and try to, in myself, in my own eyes, see it in Greek and then see it in English and say, oh my God, does this mean the same, or is there a connection? That's something that I didn't consider before, but you're right. I should. Maybe I should. There we go. One more challenge.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, first a comment to respond to Professor Olney. You probably know this, but a lot of Garcia Marquez's novels, Cien Años, are used in history and political science courses in this country. That's how true they are to the reality of Colombia and Latin America. In fact, Gabo himself told me that in France, his books are also used in political science courses. So that's how it straddles both fields, including yours. I have a question for Professor Diamantis. First, a practical one. Had the translator done translation before Garcia Marquez, or was this her first job?
No, she has done a lot of other translations from any other Spanish authors too. I listed them. Carlos Fuentes, Mario Vargas, Losa Isabel Arlende. And actually she had said the story to me too, that there was a dinner giving awards to the translators in the European, I guess, community. And Carlos Fuentes was there, and she met him for the first time. She did not know of him before. And when she told him that she had translated his books into Greek, he got so excited that he was talking with the translator. But he grabbed her and took her over to Garcia Marquez and says to him, Gabi, this is the translator, the Greek translator of my book. And and I had written it down to say it and I forgot, so I'm glad you brought it up. He smiled and looked at both of them and said, Clary has done all of my books in Greek. But I think it's also the personal touch, the personal connection. Having spent time with the authors makes the translation more efficient because you understand both of the cultures. And Gabo had been at her house having Greek dinners repeatedly, so I assumed that the connection made the books more real in that sense. But she has done a lot of others. She has actually done translations from French to Greek, and she's a poet and author herself. So she has, she has all of that.
Well, when I interviewed him in 1982, he mentioned, in fact, that the Greek translation is done very well. So what you said confirms what he told me. I mean, the household has a copy of it. But I'm curious about this. His novels especially do well in the parts of the world that are relatively impoverished, like in parts of Asia and Russia, less so in the metropolitan countries like Germany, let's say. So I wonder if Greek, being relatively impoverished in Europe, if the Greek reader feels a connection with Macondo because of that, since they've gone through dictatorship,
Yes.
they've gone through occupation,
Yeah.
they are on the margins of Europe. I wonder if that speaks to them.
Yeah, actually, it just again remind me of something else in our discussions that we had with Clary. She said in 1981, when she started doing the translations, in 1982, 100 Years of Solitude, and the other books. In 1983, in the Greek government, there was an uproar, the change of the government, where finally the socialist Papandreou was taking over, and the Greeks felt a little bit of freedom to express themselves and found a connection in his books that Gabo was writing about. And the more I was asking my colleagues of my age if they have read Gabo, they said, oh, of course, it's, blah, blah, blah. They knew everything about it. And I said, oh my God. But yes, the connection of the change of the politics, 1983 became very, it made the connection real. Because also by 1983, 84, Clary's husband, who was a Colombian, became the first ambassador to Greece. So they moved and lived in Greece. So that opened up the doors to the Greeks and knew what Colombia was all about. But the politics definitely played a role, definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you. There's going to be some lunch pretty soon. It's coming into this room, and you're invited to stay and have something to eat. There are tables just outside of this adjoining room. So,
Thank you.
please.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.